interesting facts about famous people.
The Fort, a feature and theme of many a Western. Back in the Wild West, when hostilities broke out with local tribes, the fort was the place of refuge, a place the cavalry who policed the region were based, strategically placed on routes that supported the migration to the west. Forts are the natural settings for the Western cavalry movies. The movie title often contains the name of the fort to convey that it is a cavalry movie. As the popularity of cavalry movies waned in the late 1960s, these fort names for movies disappeared. So today we will remind ourselves of these great Western movies and keep the tradition and genre alive. Remember, we are here to celebrate the genre and pass it on to our younger generation. If you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button to get my new videos. If you want to check out my many other videos, head over to my channel. The link is in the description. Let's get into it. Fort Apache, 1948, a Western directed by John Ford, starring John Wayne and Henry Fonda. The film was the first of the director's Cavalry trilogy, followed by She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 1949, and Rio Grande, 1950, all starring Wayne. The film was one of the first to present an authentic and sympathetic view of Native Americans. Movie critic Dave Kerr called it one of the greatest achievements of classical American cinema, a film of immense complexity that never fails to reveal new shadings with every viewing, and among the first pro-Indian Westerns, in its portrayal of Indigenous Americans with sympathy and respect. Fort Defiance, 1951, a Western directed by John Rawlins, starring Dane Clark, Ben Johnson, Peter Graves, Tracy Roberts, George Cleveland, and Ralph Sanford. Ben Shelby rides up to a cattle ranch outside Fort Defiance, Arizona, looking for Johnny Talon. He meets Johnny's brother, Ned, who informs him that according to a letter Johnny had written just after the end of the Civil War, he should be home soon. As they are talking, the horse Ned had been trying to saddle rears up. He falls, and Ben saves him from being trampled. When he asks Ned why he didn't get out of the way, Ned reveals that he is blind. Fort Worth, 1951, a Western directed by Edwin L. Marin, starring Randolph Scott. It is Marin's final directing work, as he died 2 months before the release. Former gunfighter Ned Britt sets up shop in Fort Worth, Texas. As a newspaperman, he falls in love with Flora Talbot, who is the fiancée of a former friend, Blair Lunsford. Britt tries to expose the crooked cattle baron, Gabe Clevenger, in his newspaper. Clevenger resorts to violence in order to prevent the arrival of the railroad at Fort Worth. Britt has to rethink his journalistic methods to stop him and resorts to violence himself. Fort Vengeance, 1953. Fort Vengeance, aka Royal Mounted Police, is a Western directed by Leslie Selander, starring James Craig, Rita Moreno, and Keith Larson. Opening scenes were shot at the Ray Corrigan Ranch in Simi Valley, California, and no way, shape or form resembles Montana, North Dakota, or the plains of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Two North Dakota brothers, James Craig, Keith Larson, flee to Canada and join the Mounties during an Indian dispute. Escape from Fort Bravo, 1953, a Western set during the American Civil War, directed by John Sturges, starring William Holden, Eleanor Parker, and John Forsyth. Fort Bravo is a Union prison camp with a strict disciplinarian named Captain Roper, William Holden. A pretty woman named Carla Forrester, Eleanor Parker, shows up to help with the wedding of her friend, but has really come to assist in freeing some prisoners, including her previous beau, Confederate Captain John Marsh, John Forsyth. Roper falls in love with her, and she with him, and the escape happens after the wedding celebrations. and Carla unexpectedly leaves with the 4 Confederate escapees. This gives Roper an additional motive to recapture the escapees. Fort Yuma, 1955, a western directed by Leslie Selander, starring Peter Graves, Joan Vons, John Huston, and Joan Taylor. When word reaches the U.S. Cavalry Command that an Apache chief's son is planning an attack on Fort Yuma, a column of soldiers led by Lieutenant Ben Keegan is sent to deliver ammunition and supplies. Keegan has a long-standing hatred of the Indians and even resents that his chief scout, Sergeant Jonas, is an Apache himself. Accompanying them is missionary Melanie Crown, an educated and enlightened woman from the East who despises prejudice and strongly believes everyone can live together in harmony, and the sergeant's sister, Francesca, whose mutual attraction with Keegan is complicated considering his views. Revolt at Fort Laramie, 1957, a western directed by Leslie Selander, starring John Dana, Greg Palmer, Francis Helm, and Don Gordon. The film was shot in Kanab, Utah, with Harry Dean Stanton making his debut in the film. In 1861, the undermanned garrison of Fort Laramie, Wyoming Territory, was attempting to keep the peace with the Sioux Nation, led by Chief Red Cloud. As part of the treaty with the Indians, the United States government pays Red Cloud in gold to keep the peace and support his people. However, Red Cloud comes up with the idea of stealing the gold and using the non-payment as an excuse to go to war. Meanwhile, as the United States faces events that lead to the American Civil War, the garrison of the fort is split in their sympathies. A third of the men, led by Sergeant Darrach, support the Confederate States of America, while the rest, led by Sergeant Serrell, support the Federal Union. When the garrison hears about the Battle of Fort Sumter, the Confederate faction not only wants to leave the army, but capture the fort and take the gold shipment due to be paid to Chief Red Cloud to Texas. Guns of Fort Petticoat, 1957, a western produced by Harry Joe Brown and Audie Murphy for Brown Murphy Pictures, based on the 1955 short story Petticoat Brigade by Chester William Harrison, directed by George Marshall, filmed at the Iverson Movie Ranch and at Old Tucson. The fictional story tells the tale of an army deserter training a disparate group of women to become Indian fighters, climaxing in a battle of the Alamo-type action. In 1864, during the American Civil War, Texan Lieutenant Frank Hewitt, Audie Murphy, was serving with the U.S. Cavalry under Colonel John Chivington. On patrol, Hewitt meets a group of unarmed Indians who are returning to the Sand Creek Reservation that they were not supposed to leave. While being briefed by Hewitt, the colonel orders the attack, known to history as the Sand Creek Massacre. Hewitt not only disagrees with the punishment of the Indians, but realizes they will use the attack as an excuse to unite and spread terror throughout the Southwest, including his own hometown in Texas, which has sent most of its men to fight for the Confederacy. Colonel Chivington sees Indian attacks on Texas, which will create havoc in the Confederacy, as a bonus. Violently objecting, Hewitt is placed under arrest and confined to quarters. Fort Dobbs, 1958, a western, the first of 3 directed by Gordon Douglas, to star Clint Walker. The other 2 were Yellowstone Kelly in 1959 and Gold of the Seven Saints in 1961, based on a screenplay by George W. George and Burt Kennedy. It was intended to capitalize on Walker's success in the Cheyenne TV series, but box office returns were modest. Gar Davis has to get out of Largo in a hurry because a man he threatened to kill has been found dead. He comes across a man in Comanche territory killed by an arrow. Gar trades jackets with the dead man and then shoves the corpse over a cliff, hoping the posse pursuing him will think he's the one who is dead. Trying to steal a horse, Gar's face is grazed by a bullet shot by young Chad Gray, whose mother Celia tends to the stranger's wound. Indians attack the house. Gar helps fend them off, after which he and the Greys take off on horseback towards the safety of Fort Dobbs. Fort Massacre, 1959, a western directed by Joseph M. Newman, starring Joel McCrea, Forrest Tucker, John Russell, and Susan Cabot. A possibly mad cavalry commander leads his troops through dangerous Indian territory. An embittered cavalry sergeant must take over his regiment after their commanding officer is killed during an ambush. Vincent is driven by his hatred of Apaches, who were responsible for the death of his wife and children. He and his remaining men, including Travis and McGurney, try to ride 100 miles to the safety of Fort Crane, a fictional analogue of Fort Crane in New Mexico Territory. Along the way they attack an Indian band, despite being heavily outnumbered. Vincent's vengeance knows no bounds, until Travis is ultimately forced to take a stand and confront him. Fort Courageous, 1965, a western directed by Leslie Selander. Stars Fred Bear, Don Barry, Red, Anna Landy, Harry Lauter, Walter Reed, and Joe Patridge. The film was released on May 1, 1965, by 20th Century Fox. An ex-cavalry sergeant being escorted to prison after being convicted of a crime he didn't commit, finding himself leading the remnants of a unit that has been under Indian attack at a fort. The commanding officer has been killed. The Indians vastly outnumber them, and the only bargaining chip they have is the fact that they have captured the Indian chief's son. Parts of the film were shot at the Kanab Movie Fort, Johnson Canyon, and The Gap in Utah. Thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. I appreciate likes and subscribers. Hit the notification bell to get my new videos. Take a look at my channel. The link is in the description. Bye for now. See you again soon.
Interesting facts about famous people.